I'm Corbett Wall with USDA Market News, here with your weekly feeder and stocker cattle market summary for the week ending November the 22nd, where your feeder cattle and calves weighing over 600 pounds, those going right on to feed, sold steady to $3 lower. Most of your feeders this time of year, those big feeders weighing over 6, are really just big calves and not yearlings, so it's kind of inevitable that those price levels are going to back off a little bit. It's not really that demand's much lower, it's just that buyers are not going to give those big prices for the big calves as they would for those seasoned green yearlings that they've been buying all fall here. But it's just, we've gotten to the point now where our yearling supplies have just completely been exhausted. And now those sales of big cattle are just going to be big calves, and they're not going to be as high priced as what we've seen for the last several weeks. Lighter weight calves, stocker type cattle, sold unevenly steady to $5 higher, with the biggest gains seen on 4-weight steer calves in the southeast, which they were pretty heavily demanded across there. And we see good calf demand all over the country, as we've got some nice stockpiles of hay and some winter pasture that guys can hold these calves on through this winter. Some of these backgrounders are already starting to worry about how they're going to get calves bought to turn out on grass next spring. They might find it easier just to buy some lighter weight cattle right now and hold them through the winter. So we're already starting to see that, and we see that earlier every year as it just gets harder and harder to buy lightweight cattle when the springtime comes. But for your heavier feeding cattle, the board opened lower this week, quite a bit lower. Both feeder and fat cattle futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange were quite a bit lower Monday and Tuesday, and it kind of set the pattern for this week. And we also just saw that maybe people are starting to think maybe this feeder market has topped out a little bit, and that these prices are on the backside of the mountain going over. Not to say that we're not going to have plenty of demand for all classes of feeders and stockers going on, but feedlots are pretty full right now of cattle that they've taken delivery of over the past 6-8 weeks, and maybe just not quite as heavily demanded and pushing these prices higher. Again, like we're not going to have any of those green yearlings to really bring those top high prices. But we did see some weakening in calves too later in the week, as some of your order buyers, like down in the southeast, later in the week, they didn't want to get stuck with a piece of a load with Thanksgiving week coming up next week and going to be light runs everywhere and a lot of sale barns shut down. Then we had another big cold front come across the plain states, and they keep dipping a little bit farther south every time, and had a lot of freezing rain coming across and snow flurries, and cattle handle cold weather really well, even frigid cold weather, but cold and wet not so much. And especially on some new purchases, you get those cattle in, they get soaking wet, and then it gets cold, and then you've got trouble on your hands right there. So late in the week, we did see some weakening of the market on all classes. This Friday here, your cattle on feed report come out. I have to call it a little bit bearish, pretty much all on the placement figure, as your November 1st inventories on feed come out exactly like they thought, down 6%, which is what they thought from the same time a year ago. But your placement figures come in at 10% more than the same time a year ago, which they thought they were going to be heavier, but not quite that much heavier. And your marketings were just a little off of what they thought they'd be. They were still at 101% of a year ago, but they thought they'd be just a pinch higher than that. But that placement figure, which that's always a hard one to get, that placement figure come in larger than what they thought. But you get to thinking, and especially compared to the same time a year ago, this year most of your producers, especially calf producers and backgrounders and yearling growers, were able to keep their cattle to term up to the fall like they normally would want to, where a year ago a lot of them ran out of grass and were trying to save their cows or whatnot, and they had to sell those cattle late in the summer there, have a drought sale. this time most people were able to keep their cattle up until they normally would keep them, which is responsible for a lot of that jostling of that placement total there. And you look back and everything pretty much fits. Your auction receipts have been quite a bit heavier, running about 9% heavier ever since we got back from the government shutdown there for the last of October and this part of November too. So that just goes to show you that those are reasonable figures. The fat cattle market this week was $1 lower. Still awful good, but just trading within a narrow range there the last several weeks. $1 up, $1 back, right in there, which is still very close to the record high, but we're at 131 right now and 207 dressed. Regional weighted averages this week in the north central states, an 8 to 900 pound steer cost you 162.05 compared to 164.97 last week and 140.20 a year ago. Down in the south central states, 7 to 800 pound steer cost you 163.28 compared to 162.93 last week and 143.29 a year ago. Down in the southeast, a 4 to 500 pound steer cost you 180.29 compared to 180.76 last week and 145.20 a year ago. That wraps up your feeder and stocker cattle market summary for this week. Check out our website for more market information at marketnews.usda.gov. And from the Regional Market News Office in St. Joe, Missouri, we'll talk to you next week.